What if the answers you've been chasing aren't hiding in the obvious places, but in the shadows, the symbols, and the stories you've been taught to overlook in your life? What if the key to unlocking your next breakthrough in life or work isn't found in a more logical place, not in a place of more hustle or more data, but by leaning into something wilder and wonderfully uncomfortable? In this Encore conversation, we're going to step off the beaten path and wander into a mysterious terrain of what my guest calls the third way. We'll discover that. A realm shaped not by spreadsheets or step by step formulas, but by myths, fairy tales, and imagination that defy convention at times. This is where the art of living gets beautifully uncommodified. If you're ready to loosen your grip on certainty, embrace some paradox, and discover an elegant new way to solve problems that maybe have been gnawing at you for a long time, then buckle up. This is going to bend your mind, I think, a bit, but in the best possible way. Hey, my friends, welcome back to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and today my guest on the show once again is Lenore Walker. Lenore, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to be here again.
Oh, it is. So, yeah, listen, I was thinking about this, Lenore. So if you, by the way, if you're listening and if you haven't listened to the first episode I did with Lenore, you've got to listen to it. It was actually episode number 25. I can't believe this. I think we're close to 190 something now. February of 2021, a long time ago. That episode, that conversation was called Pencils, Paint, and the Tale of Two Windows, which, by the way, I think is a rather clever title. I think that was a good one I came up with. But before we get into that, a bit about Lenore. Lenore is a psychotherapist who blends her years of expertise with a calming, encouraging presence to help people navigate through life's toughest transitions. Rooted in Jungian psychology and creative therapy, she guides clients to uncover their inner wisdom, heal soul rifts, and transform challenges into wholeness. Lenore is also one of our best friends, my wife Pam and I, and has been for 30 years. I can't believe over 30 years. We must have met when we were 3. It's crazy, hard to believe. 30 plus years we've known each other. And I always am super delighted to chat with Lenore. We have her over for dinner, we chat, and this is going to be almost like a dinner chat, which is going to be great. But so if it's a dinner chat, we can uncork with a drink, of course. So what are you going to drink tonight, Lenore?
Well, in honor of my late sister Christina, who introduced me to Stella Artois and who was one of my greatest supporters, and with her encouragement, this is why I do the work that I do, because she was just my greatest cheerleader. That's what I'm going to uncork tonight. So here we go.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, and now I am going to crack open something called my favorite whiskey, which is a 16-year-old Lagavulin. And
Oh,
I'm going to take the lid off that one, and we're going to see where we go. All right. Cheers, my friend.
cheers.
Okay, got to pour
Gonna do
carefully. The
this
last time I opened a
gently.
beer live on the podcast, it went all over me. So today I'm doing whiskey. I'm a little afraid of the beer.
Trying to be careful to get that a little bit controlled.
There you go. Awesome.
There we go.
Beautiful. Cheers
Cheers.
to you. Mm, mm. By the way, I do
Okay.
like that beer you're drinking. It's good beer.
I would never have known of it, had my sister not introduced me to it. She was in the hospitality profession, amongst other things, and so when this first came here, she was one of the first people to make sure everybody knew about it.
Ah, that's amazing. Awesome. Okay, let's get into this conversation. So, full disclosure to all my listeners. So, when when I asked Lenore, hey, what do you want to chat about? By the way, when you ask Lenore Walker, what do you want to chat about? You have no idea what you're going to get back because Lenore can chitty chat about 1,000 things. And so Lenore comes back and says, I love to talk about the third way. And I have to admit, at the beginning, I was like, oh, that's great. And then this morning, before the podcast, I sent a frantic text, I believe at something like 5:16 in the morning. And I said, Lenore, what is the third way? So I am going to be going on a journey of discovery during this conversation because I don't really understand where we're going to go in this conversation. So let's start with this. So you can start with what is the third way if you want, or if you want to be mysterious, you can figure out a different way to braille into the conversation. But something's got you excited, and there's something very powerful in this idea. So let's explore it together.
So the third way is actually something that a lot of people may have heard about, but not possibly that way. And it does come from the work of Dr. Carl Jung, and it's part of where we arrive once we're able to contend with the struggle of wanting to have the easy, quick solution to a problem, or wanting to bypass it altogether. And the third way is part of what he called um, the characterizing feature in the transcendent function. In other words, we're all on a journey toward wholeness. The third way is often the way that gets us a step onward on our true, honest, uncommodified journey toward wholeness. And it isn't obvious, this third way. Some people call it the third thing. I have an artist colleague who runs a pottery studio. She calls her pottery studio a third space
Hmm.
because she understands this concept. So you may have heard it. We've all actually heard it often in fairy tales, but we haven't maybe noticed. So you'll notice that there's often three characters in a fairy tale, or three options, or maybe two options that contend with one another. And then often this kind of nerdy, weird, offbeat character comes up with another way.
Hmm.
And that's often an acknowledgement of the aspects that might be positive about the other two, as they both have validity, even if they seem negative, and is able, though, to distill those into something different. And so, does that kind of answer your
Yeah,
question in a
yeah.
nutshell?
Well, yeah, it answers my question, but it gives me a lot more, which is what I like. So again, maybe I'm gonna ask a question that just is just nonsensical, and if I do, you can say, "Well, you missed the mark on that." Fair enough. It won't be the first time I've done that. But if it's the third way, it suggests maybe then there's a first way or a second way that I might typically like to encounter myself, my journey, my conundrums, my clusterfucks, whatever I'm trying to figure out. Is there a first way and a second way that typically I approach things at, and now this is the third better or more whole path?
Well, here's where that's a great question, Tim. And by the way, there are no stupid questions in
Okay.
my.
Thank you, by the way.
Um,
That's why I love Lenore. She affirms me.
they're all good. So that's a great question because it also kind of harkens back to something I think Jung was very good at helping us parse out. But I want to preface it by saying, the way that we're talking about this here is very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes.
Just really want to acknowledge this because I think our Indigenous relations actually have always understood what we call, or Jung called, a third thing or the third way eons before we woke up to this. And actually, Jung admitted that some of his concepts were rounded out because of the amount of time he spent living and working amongst some Indigenous peoples, because he was fascinated by the way that they approached life.
Huh.
And their whole psychological construct was different and often more effective. For instance, I'll give you one. Like, I met a Cree woman a number of years ago, and she said, Lenore, we never worry about what we're supposed to do until we're about 60. We don't stress out like you folks. And I said, why? She said, because in our understanding, you're an adolescent until you're 60. But
Wow.
woman, by golly, by the time you're 60, you better know how you show up, what gifts you have, your journey, where it has brought you, how you can contribute to the community and the world. So you see, there's that context. I just love this. So anyway, um, getting back to this where Carl Jung talked about how sometimes, and I think this characterizes North American culture and society for the most part, is will prefer a certain function. And he saw there being four functions. One is
Okay.
the intellectual,
Yeah.
the other is the emotional, the other is a sensory-based kind of body sensing, what we can conceive with our bodies, our senses. And then the other is intuition or instinct. In our culture here, I think in North America, we default to preferring the intellectual function in an extroverted way. Because there's also two attitudes according to Jung, and one is extroverted and the other is introverted. We all have all of them as far as he was concerned, but we tend to kind of concoct something that we prefer.
Hmm.
And so, in answer to your specific question, a lot of the time we'll pick the thing that is familiar. And that maybe has some valid components, but it's just our easy, often knee-jerk reaction of, oh, I'll just do this,
Hmm.
because that's what I've always done, or I feel more comfortable this way. God forbid that we suffer any kind of discomfort or unfamiliarity. I mean, that's kind of the way we've been taught and wired and socialized.
Yeah.
Oftentimes in our culture, there's this other way, which is very emotive,
Hmm.
and it might include some of those somatic, sense-based kinds of data gathering tools. But the one thing that's very fascinating to me as I work with so many different people is that intuition and instinct is always present, but it's almost always thrown under the threshold in
Hmm.
favor of intellect. And
Huh.
so in
Yeah.
answer to your question, people can maybe come to a crossroads or a challenge, and instead of understanding the intersectionality of all these aspects, what it means to be fully human and fully alive, will default to the one that feels the most familiar. Often, how can I figure it out?
Yeah.
How can I use my very brilliant mind to come up with a solution? Doesn't necessarily have to be elegant in any way, shape, or form. It's just let's fix it, because it's seen as something to be fixed within a 24/7 kind of landscape. The other might be this kind of very reactionary, emotive kind of response, or reaction. It could be a combo of both. Neither, though, on their own get us to the third way. And sometimes there's one that we'll even avoid, though it's kind of niggling in the background, and we bypass it. So that's a potentiality that is underserved, but it's present. So now we have this tension of opposites. We could do it this way or we could do it this way. But
Right.
neither way really is going to be informed by our authenticity, even our struggle, and it's certainly usually going to lead us to what is commodified, not
Huh. Yeah.
commodified.
Okay. So yeah, this is my head's spinning right now, which I really like. I like when my head spins, and it is not the whiskey yet. Okay, let's be clear. So okay, so this is interesting. So third way, if I'm going to just process this for myself. So I have a first way that I might default the way I want to go, the road I want to take. I'll call it the road or path, the first path that I want to approach things when I'm problem solving, when I'm struggling. I have a first way I typically might want to approach it. I might say, well, that's not getting it here. Then I choose a second path and I try to explore the problem maybe there. What I seldom realize is actually there's a third way. There's a third path that might be an amalgam of something, but it actually is the path that I need forward, but it gets smothered in a lot of ways for me. Is that am I tracking?
Yep. And often this third way is characterized by mystery and symbols, frequently dream imagery. Although a lot of people report to me they can't remember their dreams, you'd be surprised how many remember snippets, and that's all we need. But these are images that come from our unconscious as data points to give us additional information that we've missed, that is a little more numinous in terms of, it's hard to kind of grab onto. It's got that kind of, um, yeah, very mysterious, almost sometimes a little spiritual, highly symbolic, isn't obvious what it actually means. And I think the thing that really characterizes the third way is curiosity and the need to wait.
Huh.
And these are two things that, in my humble opinion, in our culture, we have a very difficult time with.
Hmm.
You know, being curious is considered something sometimes for children only.
Yeah.
Expected to be playful, curious explorers, little adventurers, uncovering that thing under the rock and finding that there's a whole universe under there, So we accept it on that level, but curiosity, it gets hard because it means you're going to be different.
Hmm.
You're going to think a little less conventionally, usually. You're going to probably also be one of those people who needs to kind of retreat a little, maybe, or wait. And that leads me to the waiting. I mean, so often we don't like waiting in
Hmm.
our day-to-day lives. We hardly can stand it in, you know, a line of traffic, and we certainly don't like to have to wait for solutions. And I think it's because we're very pain averse or suffering averse or just discomfort averse.
Yeah.
And yet, the waiting is so critical to this because it allows things to kind of cook and stew in that unconscious realm where it has a chance to lift itself up to intellect and to also take into account some of the feelings we might have about it and to honor it all, but to not rely solely on any one thing. I think
Wow.
that's really important.
Powerful. Y-
Because I think we're addicted to quickness and the easy fix. That's just me.
Yeah.
I know I'm more naturally wired to think that. But, the inability to wait is a kind of addiction. It's the addiction to, and I'm quoting the late Angela Zarian here. She was an amazing cultural anthropologist. She said that the inability to wait is like an addiction because it's an addiction to the need to know.
Huh.
And
Hmm.
the need to know often will co-opt us right like that. And we don't get a chance to kind of mine the depths of what is actually already in us as wisdom that, needs to have time to kind of percolate and come up to the surface of our awareness. And Jung really borrowed from the whole alchemical process to describe this. It is not a short process.
Hmm. Well, listen, since we're going to honor the waiting process in this for a little bit here in the conversation, which I like, why don't we pause and have a drink? And then if you're listening in, you can contemplate a little bit about what my good friend is challenging with. So I think it's time for a drink. Because what I found recently is that oftentimes I get my guests talking so much, they don't get a chance to have a second drink on the show. So I'm going to grab another drink. You grab a little drink, and then we'll come back in here. Oh, look at my listeners are waiting. It's very good. I have a feeling they're waiting with bated breath. So, okay. So I want to go back to some things you said because it's starting to get me thinking a little bit. So first of all, as you describe that, what I'm realizing I think about myself is that I'm curiously impatient. So I am curious, but I am impatient. And the interesting thing you said is how impatience actually works against curiosity. That I don't know if I really thought about how they interplay between the two. It's hard to remain curious while you're excruciatingly impatient. So that's interesting. So I'm processing that right now because that I find that really interesting of how that can fight against, one another. I also think that, if I'm really honest, I think that um, I struggle at time with mystery. I like to have things buttoned up. I, there's something magical about mystery, but to be very frank, uh, I, 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 I want to get beyond the smoke and through the mirrors and through the curtain. I want to get around, the other side, and I want to see who the Wizard of Oz is. Like the big man and I'm the Wizard of Oz. That's the mystery. At the end of the day, I want to know, hey, it's just a little guy in a stool. But once you know he's the little guy in the stool, it's not very magical. Like,
No,
it's
but
not.
in that story, I love, well, if we go to Wicked,
Yeah.
you know, Ephelba is amazing because she's kind of a character, and here we get into stories, legends, and myths. Here's the second half of The Wizard of Oz is where we go to the Wicked Witch, and we really start to get to understand that she's the embodiment of all the things, and yet she's also considered to be the greatest transgressor. And this is often what happens when we become curious, when we are going after our own heart's desire in seeking the third way, because some people do, and where we're willing to contend and to suffer with the difficulty of the things that are not yet known or evident.
Huh.
And so I would really lead your podcast participants, if you have not seen the first Wicked, which I saw on the stage, amazing, years ago. But if you haven't seen the movie, I would highly suggest renting it and watching it from that angle,
Hmm.
because
I,
that character is archetypal about this, the conundrum of the third way. And
that's
I
interesting.
really love what you're saying here, Tim. Parker J. Palmer, uh he's a social activist in the States. He's a lovely, lovely person. He's created a whole series of circles of trust, which are all about developing community and trying to help people who have various points of view talk to one another. He talks about this, and it's not really the third way, but it's the way of the soul,
Huh.
which is kind of what we're working with here. As if you were walking into a beautiful, deep green, dark, but kind of unpredictable, little scary forest. And you're walking on the path and you hear some rustling in the distance, and you know that there's some creature in there, and your curiosity is piqued. But Parker J. Palmer says, if we go running toward that pell-mell, it will run to its own safety. It will go under the threshold again,
Hmm.
not be
Hmm.
available to us. But if we sit and wait, it may come to us in this kind of dense, thick forest that we're not maybe totally trusting or feeling totally comfortable in, but it is kind of magical.
Huh.
And so we can accept a certain measure of mystery. And I think this is where the transaction or the help of waiting comes in. It actually helps us to make this transaction, not that it's, a commodity, but to actually treat with ourselves, to slow down enough to
Yeah.
say, it's here. But if
Oh,
I go trying to pull it out, it's either going to bite me,
yeah.
or I'm going to chase it away, or I'm going to run.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So would you generally say, and obviously generalities are problematic, but would you generally say that the third way is a way it's a way of waiting?
Wow, that's a great question. Let me consider that for a moment. I would have to say, based on my own experience, the narratives of others that I have the privilege of working with, people I know who I admire and, you know, live and move and have my being with, but also in stories. It often does require waiting as part of the strategy.
Interesting. Lenore, I'm thinking about something as we're talking, and again, listeners, if you're listening in, I strongly encourage you, I always do, to maybe pause the podcast, reflect, do whatever you need to do. And as a reminder, I'm discovering this conversation as you are. A lot of times when I have conversations, I have a general knowledge maybe about what I'm going to talk about, or maybe I have more than a general knowledge. In this case, the third way was really a new term to me, and now that you describe it, I think I understand it, or I've heard of it. I just haven't heard of it in this way. But so I'm experiencing this also for the first time, which is kind of fascinating for me. But one thing I'm thinking about, as we connect maybe the third way as a waiting way, there's the waiting is almost the doorway or the opening. You open the gate to the third way, maybe as through waiting. I'm thinking about, from for those of you, for me, come from a religious perspective or background. I'm thinking actually about a particular verse in the New Testament that describes this idea of waiting, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase. I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but this idea that it's this waiting is described at some point, an analogy, I think, in the New Testament, like the waiting that happens when a woman's pregnant.
Yep.
And it talks about it's very poetic language. It says that as the woman waits, she is enlarged in the waiting. And when you think of the metaphor, it's like the waiting period, that gestation period, as the waiting occurs, the enlargement comes, a change of capacity, maybe something. Of course, now we have this woman has life now within her, and it's growing, it's expanding. But the phrase, which is interesting, she's enlarged in the waiting. There's this sense of enlargement, anticipation, greater capacity to do something or be something or birth something. It's a really interesting image. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the connection of how, maybe part of the challenge of the first and second way is maybe there is a smallness in those ways. And maybe through the waiting and finding that third way, there's an expansion or an enlargement of our heart, of our mind, of our capacity, of our ability. I I I just am connecting these dots in my head. They might be unconnectable, but I'm
No,
really
that's
finding it interesting as I
yeah,
think
and I
about that.
mean, look at you coming up with an image,
Yeah,
from um a a sacred text story.
yeah,
It's a story, but it's one we can all identify with because it gives us this larger symbol. And symbols are not like signs. They hold some mystery. Their meaning is not always readily available to us. It takes some time for the meaning to unfold and for us to become aware of the depth of what it includes, just like what you just went through in the last moment here. As
yeah,
you were, unpacking that, that's exactly what was happening. The mystery was starting to have its effect. And as a result, you start perceiving something in a very different way. And even having to perceive an image and to unpack it a bit slows us down,
yeah,
doesn't it? But it also has this beautiful thing of letting us dialogue with our deeper awareness that we maybe coast over very quickly. And it
mhm,
comes back to us through an image or a symbol. But not only that, we start to see that this is connected to a much bigger human lived story.
yeah.
So we're not alone. We're not isolated. Certainly, we have our own local story, and we are within this larger human story. And there's something really grounding about that, very centering for people, because across cultures, there are stories, characters, imagery that stand the test of time, that are common to all and cross pollinate, so to speak. And you can be speaking through a translator to somebody else about your favorite fairy tale, and they'll have a very similar version of it in their home country or hometown. Same
Yeah.
imagery, and this is Jung's awareness of the collective unconscious, but also this transpersonal element,
Yeah.
that we're part of a much bigger cosmology here. And the gift within it is that we've been given these ways that help initiate us into stepping beyond our own conventionality and our own limits. So exactly what you said, this enlarging of capacity, this opening of the heart, this becoming more receptive to, okay, maybe I don't know yet, and maybe I don't understand that, but there's something there and I know it. And that knowing is the intuition. So that instinctual function stops being injured and it comes back online. And now we're working with not only, intellect, emotion, body sensations, but the instinct and the intuition is online, and we're functioning fully. And that's part of this entire process on the
Huh.
journey toward wholeness that opens in these are the components that help open the third way.
Yeah. Oh, powerful. So let me ask you, based on your experience, your education as a psychotherapist, your experience in your clinical work. So would you say, and you may not be able to say, but would you say potentially that wholeness is quite elusive for the average Homo sapien without finding the third way?
Yep. I'm biased though.
Fair enough. At least, hey, listen, if you're biased and you know us, clap your hands. Hold on. We're biased. Yes, we are biased. Fair enough. And I appreciate that. So you would say yes, that your belief, okay, your belief, both your educational understanding and your lived experience and belief of clinical work leads you to the proposition, the belief that actually wholeness becomes rather difficult and elusive unless one is patient enough to find the third way, to
Yeah,
look
I
at
think,
things and approach it.
yeah, and I think it's also sometimes not even about finding it. It's about letting yourself be found,
Uh,
which is harder. And this is where our patience breaks down. I too struggle with this from
uh,
time to time. I mean, I have a very vivid brain. I love my intellect, and I can think my way out of several wet paper bags all at once, and that hasn't always served me well.
uh,
I also have the capacity for some very empathetic and deep running emotion tones that I can factor in to make better decisions. I'm usually online with my instincts and sometimes not so clued into my body, but more and more. And so, yet I still miss it. And I think this is where I like to also suggest that sometimes we are found by it because we might have a dream
yeah.
or an image from that dream landscape just lingers with us. And I want to remind people that, dreams, I know some of them are scary, but I just want you to hold your judgment about those scary parts of your dreams. And nightmares are different. I'll get to that in a minute. But, you know, dream imagery is for the dreamer.
Huh.
My sister was a mind-blowing dreamer. She used to dream every night vividly, and she'd call me and tell me her dreams like this. It's some people are just very awake to that, you know, but it is an offering from your wisdom knower deep within during the sleep time when your ego defenses are a little more relaxed to offer you content in a mysterious fashion because it knows it's going to catch your attention and bug you
Hmm.
or captivate you, or something mixed in between, and that it's going to linger. Even if you think you can't remember it, it might come sailing or floating back to you days later, and you think, oh, yeah, I had this dream and this weird thing was in it, and that is the soul's or psyche's quest toward our day-to-day functioning. And I'm not saying that's bad. We need to use our egos to do our thing, but it is an invitation to the way we present on a daily basis to say, hey, could you take a minute and just ponder this and look at this mystery, as confounding as it is, because there's a golden key in here
Hmm.
about who you really are, what you really want, where that happens for you, when that happens for you, and that is your journey toward wholeness.
Hmm.
That's the third way coming right to you. And so, I just want to say in context here too, people who have nightmares, often there's trauma. I want to gently but clearly say it will help you if you get a good therapist to come alongside you to process that. Chronic nightmares are no fun. I used to have them too. Same time every night for a few years in a row. I couldn't figure out what it was, and then I figured it out. But I had a therapist who helped me figure it out. You
Yeah.
know, but nightmares, even Carl Jung said, because he had some patients who had real difficulty with nightmares, he took it to a symbolic image to take the edge off a bit. Tim, what is a mare? It's a female horse, right?
Hmm.
Yep. So Jung said a nightmare is the mare that you are riding to the dawn
Huh.
for the night.
Wow.
I remember the
Powerful.
first time I heard that, I heard it from a Jungian analyst when I was still kind of gripped by this same nightmare every single night. And it lifted something off of me to have that symbol brought to me. And I know I'm more of a visual creature, but even the narrative descriptive language that she used to share that in this small group we were in emblazoned itself in my mind's eye as an image, of this
Yeah.
me riding on the back of this black mare as the dawn is breaking far in the distance. It's like, you know what? Don't be fooled by the dark blackness. You're moving through this. That is what a
Yeah.
nightmare is for,
You know,
is to
that's
move
just
you
yeah,
through it.
that's powerful. I mean, I've got so many things going through my head right now. And by the way, if you for those of you listening, you may have listened. I did a podcast a long time ago, and I think it's entitled something like "Everybody Needs a Coach and a Therapist." So if you listen to that, you know my belief on this too. So a couple things are stirring in me. First of all, and I just want to tuck into what you just said about nightmares, which is interesting. So yesterday, which isn't yesterday when you hear this podcast, but yesterday. At a time now gone, I spent some time with a good friend of mine, Terry Black, who is just an amazing creature, creative creature, and filmmaker and artist and provocateur and a great friend and provocateur of me. And I was over at his studio yesterday, and he was showing me some new editing he had done on a film he's working on, and Terry his original career, he was in marketing and magazine creative. He was a creative director, and he was very crafty copywriter. So Terry understands the art of words.
Mhm.
And I'm in his studio, and his studio is a theater where he does screenings. And he says to me, he says, "Oh, let me just turn up the darkness." Well, when he said this, I just held it in my mind, and then he turned up the darkness, and then the film comes on. And after he, the lights came on, and Terry is very theatrical. He's now sitting in his director's chair here on the side talking to me. And I said, "Terry, the whole time, I just couldn't get this phrase out of my mind." I said, "You turned up the darkness so I could see the light." And it just like pierced my soul. And his craftiness. Oh, let me just turn up the darkness, which is, anyway. So I'm
Love that.
resonating with what you just said about
I love
nightmares.
that because that's kind of the sneakiness of the mystery you
It,
were talking
it
about a
is.
few moments ago,
It
is
is.
that this third way is characterized by the symbolic, the numinous, the not easily available to our understanding or immediately understood, and we have to tolerate some of that. You
Yeah.
know, turning up the darkness, I love that
Yeah.
because, also from the sacred text that you quoted earlier in the Old Testament of that text, there is a very obscure verse that I wish more people knew about. I think it might be in Isaiah. And in it, the supreme being says, I will give you the treasures of the darkness.
Huh.
Now, how are
Interesting.
you going to get the treasures of the darkness if you aren't willing to actually go there and wait?
Yeah.
And it's tricky because anybody who's been in pitch blackness, I was tossed into pitch
Yeah.
blackness the other day in an appointment. Their power went down and the generator didn't kick in. And this is an office with no windows. It was like sudden blackness. And I thought, oh, I have to take a breath. Ooh, okay. And there is something really available to us,
Yeah.
and we're encased and enveloped in darkness.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
it's
something
I tell you, very
that's great.
interesting.
I love
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, it is
Turn up the
interesting. Now there's a
darkness.
couple other thoughts that I'm having, and then I wanna make sure that people who might wanna connect with you have an opportunity to figure out how they might do that. Um, so so a couple things are also sort of ruminating in my small little pea brain right now. So something else you said, which is just really interesting. You talked about this idea of going down this path, and maybe there's a creature over here, and in the bush, and if I rush in, it might run away or it might eat me. But if I actually just sat on the path and I just let it come to me, I just thought that was interesting, and I'm thinking a lot about that because I think that's really really hard to do. Like just letting whatever needs to come out of the woods, just letting it come to you. Again, there's the waiting again, letting it come to you and then encountering it. That's really interesting. And maybe part of, again, I think our impatience, sometimes we have maybe problems in our lives and we want them fixed now.
Yep.
We have barriers, we have something, we have blockage, we have whatever, and we have this idea that I'm going to get it fixed now. And maybe sometimes just isn't the right time, and that just maybe there's a time sort of coefficient here sometimes, that sometimes maybe I want to rush into the woods and find this thing and slay it when it's not the right time. And so I'm thinking a little bit about this and playing that in my mind, that when I discover a foible that I have and I say I'm ready to slay it. Maybe sometimes it's hard to slay, or it's unslayable because it's not the time of its time of its death has not yet appeared, maybe.
Yeah. Or the third way of thinking about it would be maybe it doesn't need to be slain.
Oh
You
gosh.
see, the first reaction is to say, I got to get rid of this.
Yes.
When in point of fact, the second thing would be to go, I have to get honest about how this makes me feel. It makes me want to avoid it and get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're left with seeing these two ways. I want to avoid and I want
Yeah.
to get rid of it. I
Yeah.
have the power to do both.
Right.
Those would be a quick fix,
Yes.
you know? However, if I could create a little bit of allowance of distress tolerance, we call it,
Yeah.
to just be exposed to that holding the tension, Jung called it,
Yeah.
and Parker J. Palmer has also written a fair bit about it in his books because he follows some of this approach and he writes about it beautifully. But then that waiting allows us to say, maybe that thing I want to slay is, and now I'm borrowing from the words of Sina Frost, also influenced by Jung, who developed the soul collage process, which I use. Maybe it's an ally in disguise. Maybe it is a challenging energy because it needs to get my attention, but it turns out to be the very thing that is the treasure in the darkness, handing me the treasure in the darkness, saying, I really am your friend. I just want you to see this heart because you kicking against it is actually going to show you something that you really need to know.
Oh
And so,
gosh.
in that regard, it becomes a teacher and a guide.
Yeah.
And then
Wow.
you have the third way opening. And now you can honestly say, I've been so stressed out about it, I've been wanting to avoid it. It scares me.
Yeah.
It makes me mad or it makes me sad. The real foundational emotion tones, being able to get really right, honest about that. And we come home to ourselves there. We come to our authentic self because we're not lying to anybody anymore, not even ourselves. And
Wow.
we're willing to open and enlarge to the possibility that I'm developing an expanded capacity for something I would normally have slain, but actually is handing me the sword,
Yeah.
is saying, I know how this is not something you don't need to kill me. I'm handing you the sword. And actually, what I'm handing you is actually a surgical knife because you're going to need a very fine blade to kind of carve through that so that you can make your way so that it's a clean incision so that you can make your way through,
Oh
just to
my.
adopt your imagery.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I seriously, this is like a very good therapy session. This is really good, by the way. And just what you said there is just so powerful because again, it's interesting because I realize as you describe that again, my idea was I got to slay that, but you're saying, hey, Tim, actually, that might not be your enemy. That might be your ally.
Mm-hmm.
And if you waited long enough to understand and let it come out and
That
encounter
would live.
you, yeah, I mean, it's just okay. So super. So again, if you're listening in, you're still here for a reason. I always say that. So I don't know why you're here, but you're here for a reason. Don't forget that, listeners. Okay, so I got one other question, and then we're going to sort of bring this in for landing. So, okay, so while we're talking, I'm getting the sense, and I know there's no wrong questions, but there could be some wrong conclusions. So fair enough. So, so I'm thinking about great writers who great tellers, particularly tellers of wonderful fantasy, like Tolkien, like C.S. Lewis. This inkling group. So I'm
Yeah.
getting the sense that they either had a very, very powerful understanding of all the things we're talking about, or they brailled themselves into something they didn't really understand. I don't know which it was. But when I start thinking about their tales, I think, let's say we'll talk about the Lord of the Rings, for instance, and look at all of that interplay. I get the sense that these are masterful stories of the third wave.
Yes, they are. Just about every side character line, storyline and again, I'm biased because I love that book. I've been reading it frequently since I was 14. Um, but just about every one will give you a third way. Every character is presented with dire choices,
Uh,
that have dire outcomes,
yeah.
and I mean, and even the movie will be enough for you to imagistically connect with it. You'll start to see it emerge. But, you know, let's look at Arwen. Okay, let's
Hmm.
look at her. So here's someone who has she's eternal. She's an eternal being, everlasting life. She gives it to the man she loves. That's, represented by this kind of amulet pendant. And she takes on a mortal life, knowing that this puts her in a really tragic situation, you know? And yet, here she is, and all through the movie, we're watching this really significant character who was modeled on Tolkien's wife, not have to pick up a sword to show she's strong.
Huh.
That's a third way. And even Liv Tyler, who is the actress who played Arwen, said that they were trying to get her all suited up and armored up and kind of insert her into scenes where it was not part of Tolkien's story, but in the magic of movie Hollywood, whatever, they tried to do that to kind of keep the audience's interest. When they finally parsed it out, Jackson and the team, along with her, discerned that it wasn't in the original story for a reason, because Arwen is a third way.
Huh.
She embodies a third way, not having to pick up a sword,
Hmm.
being able to go after her heart's desire so strongly and keep her heart open to say, reforge the sword and get it in the hands of the right person. Like,
Hmm.
when you look at this stuff, you look at some of these great stories and they were masterful, but I think that the key was they weren't afraid to go into the realm of the mystical and the imaginative. They weren't afraid to go into the realm of story and fairy tale and imagery.
Yeah.
And and almost in the having this kind of dreamlike numinous quality that threads all the way through, that keeps us as viewers or readers just completely hooked, because it's calling to, and here's the function that gets less time, and I would love to see it lifted up, our intuition.
Yeah.
Our instinct knows that there is something there that offers guidance,
Yeah.
and we gravitate toward it because it helps.
Yeah.
And yes, there have been many voices that say, oh, that's childish, or oh, that's flaky, or oh, that's too esoteric, or whatever the judgment is. And yet you and I both, and many of your listeners, have all had experiences where something kind of tweaked and it was not quantifiable,
Yeah.
was maybe even from a movie or a story or just a scene that stuck with you, and it was just filled with this instinctual, helpful information, data that becomes this guidance that awakens us to hope, illumination, greater capacity to love, to be
Uh,
engaged in the world as it is. And my goodness, what a world we're in right now.
yeah. Yeah.
You know, we are
Wow.
needed.
Yeah.
We are
No.
needed.
Yeah, we are. And the third way, as you said, doesn't pick up the sword, which we'll leave that one there for people to contemplate. So again, first of all, what a really wonderful conversation, privileged, sacred, powerful, provocative. I mean, just I could use a lot of different adjectives to describe this conversation. Um, as every conversation that I have with you, Lenore, is. And again, if you're listening in, you're listening into a conversation, a kind of conversation that Lenore and myself and my wife Pam and other friends of ours have had for years with Lenore, which is these are the kind of conversations we have actually over dinner or when we chat, and that's what that's what I love about the depth of the relationship and the friendship and the encouragement that comes from knowing somebody, journeying with them, watching you in your own journey, Lenore, and and what also, I mean, I just for those of you again who don't know Lenore very well, I mean, one of the things, Lenore, that I have just deep respect is that you've always had this desire towards the mystical and to know the unknowable. And while also becoming very practical and pragmatic about pursuing tremendously difficult and powerful education and putting good understanding and education to the ideas that you had. And this is a wonderful amalgam that I have a lot of deep respect for, and I just want to say that. I mean, I love it. Again, if you're listening in, you're always listening in for a reason. I say that, and I don't know why if you're still listening, and I don't know why. You're going to figure that out. That'll be the third way for you in this conversation. So, Lenore, if people did want to connect with you and have a further conversation, maybe they want to explore some connection with you therapeutically or whatever that would be. What's the best way for them to try to connect with you?
So, I've kind of pared it all down and I just use my Psychology Today website page. So if
Right.
you Google Psychology Today,
Yeah.
Canada, and you go to St. Catherine's therapist, Lenore Walker, because there is another Dr. Lenore Walker
Okay.
who has done amazing work, but I'm not Dr. Lenore Walker. So you have to put Lenore Walker, St. Catherine's in Psychology Today, and then it will come up. And then you'll
Okay.
see my whole profile there and a safe way to reach me that's protected through that site.
Okay. Awesome. That's a great encouragement. So Lenore, I'm going to give you the last word. I usually get the last word, but not in this conversation. So I'm going to give you the last word. So you have one last word to people who are still with us, okay? Which is the brave and the few, okay? They're still with us, Lenore. So they're here for a reason.
Yeah.
So what's your final encouragement or provocation to them? And when you're done, I will just put a period on it when we're finished.
I would say if it's opening up to you and you're starting to realize this really appeals to you because you've been leaning toward searching for your own third way, hang in there. This is not for the faint of heart. You will upset the people around you because dare I say it, misery loves company.
Hmm.
And when you start breaking with some of those patterns, you may disrupt things and become more of a target. So be careful there. Be full of thought and full of care for yourself, and yet continue on the journey. Let what moves you move you, and don't dismiss images or symbols that stand out to you. And I'm not talking about signs. I'm talking about these numinous symbols. They're different. And to stay with it and be willing to give yourself the gift of coming home to yourself, because that's what's happening here when you're on the third way. You're coming home to yourself. And we need that self. The world is bereft of too many people who have kind of, for one reason or another, by force or circumstance, had to bail a bit. I just want to encourage your listeners to stay with it. You'll get there. You can do this.
Powerful provocation. I'm going to resist the temptation to add to that. And I'm just going to say thank you so much for listening today, listeners. Cheers. Have a wonderful third way day.